Great. Hello. Welcome back, everyone. It's so good to see you all after the New Year and Christmas. I hope you had a wonderful break. And yeah, welcome back to React Native London. We're back with another exciting live stream. Hopefully we'll be in person soon. But yeah, for now, we'll be streaming our talks. And welcome back. So yeah, we're React Native London, and we are sponsored by Theodo, and we work a lot with sort of React Native, TypeScript, Node, Next, just to name a few of the technologies. And yeah, we're lean product engineers, we're London-based, have hybrid working, and we deliver features for clients very quickly as a consultancy. And actually, we're hiring at the moment. So we have a variety of roles. We got full stack dev, got agile coaches, technical leads, project directors. You can ping us a message over at joinus@theodo.co.uk, or message us directly. I think some of our contact details are on the meetup page if you want to have a look. So yeah, this month we'll be continuing with the Expo series. One of our speakers is Cedric from Expo, and that goes on until February, where I think next month we're going to have Quinn with another talk, but that's for the future. And this time, Cedric will be talking about CI/CD with Expo, and specifically GitHub Actions. So how you can sort of maintain fast development velocity for small, for scalable apps when you're scaling and trying to get bigger. He can probably give a lot more context than I can on that. So I'm looking forward to this talk. And then our second speaker will be Fran Costa from Theodo UK. And he'll be talking to us about how you can build a native module or an native Android module for React Native, and the benefits and pros and cons of doing this, and actually, yeah, makes it look pretty easy. So it should be good. So I'm gonna hand you over to our first speaker, Cedric, and I'm excited to see his talk.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cedric van Putten, and I work at Expo. Specifically, I'm in the customer success and software engineering teams. I've been doing that for the past 2 years and having a lot of fun. So today I want to talk about something that's really close to me, something that I've been working on a lot, which is CI/CD with Expo. And first off, sorry for this clickbaity title, but that's what I came up with. So if you remember in the React Native London from October in 2021, there was John, coworker of mine in Expo, and he talked about the Wheel of Fun. This Wheel of Fun is basically an overview of the workflow you should normally walk through when building Expo apps. And if you have not seen that video yet, just go ahead and look at after this talk, because it's really great. And I'm gonna touch on this a lot, because what John did was from a single person or single developer perspective. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna guide you through an app that scales with multiple developers. So let's start. Meet Gary. Gary had a brilliant idea, created an app for it, and it went live. He gathered money with it, so he could reinvest into his app. He could grow his app, but realized soon enough that just one developer wasn't good enough. So what did he do? He hired more developers. And while he onboarded everybody into the company, some cracks started to appear in the co-working, because Gary was usually just pushing to the main branch, just working alone. So they started moving over to pull requests and started seeing some issues. One of them is breaking implementations. Now, Gary got a pull request where somebody changed the form button implementation from just an on-present and title prop to a children prop instead of a title prop. While this is an improvement, Gary knew that this had to be changed on a lot of pages, on a lot of screens. But in the pull request, he only saw it in one. So luckily, Gary caught this. But if it was any other developer who didn't know about other screens, it could have easily slipped through the cracks and breaking basically your app. So another issue that arose was trying a developer trying to help Gary unload a lot of stuff. So one of those things is deploying your new app, either through an OTA, an over-the-air update, or directly to the store. That developer didn't have access to the Expo account yet, but also required access to the App Store account and the Play Store account, which is kind of a lot of things that could go wrong there as well. Gary also built this amazing Google Maps feature where it sort of looked like golf, but as an app within the service. And how he built it was using a Google Maps API key. He did that in the environment variables, because everybody knows you should not commit any keys to your repository. So instead, he kept it out. But he didn't document it. And since it's outside of the project, somebody forgot to set the environment variable before publishing it. And I'm seeing a lot of Garys in Expo where people forget to actually set this up, but it will break your Google Maps implementation. It will just show a white screen without any true errors. So a lot of things went wrong, and the whole Gary dev team went from a happy team to a sort of depressed team. Issues were piling up, work wasn't finished. They were busy with everything besides working on the project. So Gary decided to rethink his idea of how he should lead the development. Looking back at the Wheel of Fun, like, this was supposed to be fun, right? So where does it go wrong? Gary decides to follow a pull request or some pull request all the way from all stages that it's been through. So before a pull request is created, it's being implemented. During that implementation, it's getting reviewed. And after that review, it's getting merged into the main branch, and you can build it. But he noticed that a lot of things were actually broken in the build stage. And when that happens, well, you're basically going back to the implementation without completing the full cycle, which means a setback, which means unhappy developers, which means a lot of problems. So the Wheel of Fun instantly turned into the Wheel of Hell. And you never want that. So Gary asked around and basically found ways to improve this by adding safeguards. And how did he improve that, or how did he add safeguards? By automating as much as possible. I mean, the automation tasks are pretty simple tasks that you can just let a computer do. It has to be something that never changed. It has to be something boring. It has to be something with a lot of potential for human error. So with that, I mean a lot of things, because we're still dealing with code. Automation can be just running a simple ESLint check. It should check if there are syntax issues. It should check if all types are matching using TypeScript or anything else. But it should also match a certain code styling format, which all other developers should adhere to. When that happens, you can assume certain things of the code for every developer, so everybody is online. And if this is not used or not enforced, well, it's basically free for all within the repo. Another thing that he found was adding tests. Although it does require like a lot of investment up front, it does help you in the long run. Like it can scale up pretty fast. It can scale up with you without having to change or validate every screen that you already have made. And there is also another thing to automate, which is Expo. It's kind of weird to see Expo here, since everybody thought or thinks it was a dev tool, but it's also an automation tool. And I will get back there in a second. But first, within the automation, in the automation world, there are two major groups. You have continuous integration and continuous deployment or delivery. They are used a lot, but what do they mean exactly? They basically mean, continuous integration basically means going from a set of changes and validating if they are true. And continuous deployment is delivering that code, the state of the code, to somewhere else without changing or validating the changes. So before we go into the automation and into the implementation details, Gary is using GitHub. And GitHub has one of the coolest automation tools that I have seen in a while, which is GitHub Actions. And it's basically a black box. Within that black box, you decide whatever is happening. It fits neatly inside your repository because it can actually get triggered from any of your repository events. In this case, you can see that it will run a workflow called build, test, and publish using the push event, which means on any push to any branch in your whole repository. And it will execute npm test on Linux, macOS, and Windows in parallel, like without waiting on each other. This is very cool because this not only allows you to implement your own CI, it also allows you to implement your own CD or notification system. It goes really deep. So let's find out how we can use continuous integration within GitHub Actions and Expo. So first up, what I found a really nice quote from Atlassian where they say practice of automating the integration of code changes, which is perfectly correct because it's exactly that. So how do we implement that within our Expo app? So you can see a very simple workflow that is just 21 lines long, and it can even be shorter because I use white lines, I use optional names, but this is it. With this, you already have some form of CI. Now you're thinking probably where is Expo, but I will get back to that soon. Right now, let's try to dissect this. So the header part is actually the most important part. At the top, you define your triggers, or at the on property. In this case, any event on any pull request, this will trigger that workflow. So for example, if you create a new pull request, this set of actions will actually run. If you update a pull request by pushing a new commit, this will actually run. You can choose whatever environment or operating system you want to use. But because Gary knows that Ubuntu is the fastest here, we just default to Ubuntu. Now, let's take a look at the first step. It's kind of funny how GitHub Actions doesn't check out the whole repository by default. You actually have to ask GitHub Actions to do that. But luckily, we can use an external plugin or action, as they call it, with uses, and we refer here to the default checkout action. This action takes care of everything from cloning the repository to checking out the right PR branch, from making sure you're not overloading the workflow with thousands of commits if you have a long history. So the next step is pretty simple. Like the same here, the same is available here. So we have a setup node action that basically installed whatever version we provide. That can be the latest LTS, that can be a really old version if you need it. In this case, we just want the latest LTS 16. Then next up, before we can actually run a sort of linter or a sort of test, we have to install whole project dependencies. And we do that by using, well, in this case, yarn, and run yarn install. And you notice that we're not using uses here because that refers to an external GitHub action. In this case, we just want to actually execute a command, and that will be yarn install. And the same goes for the lint project. So whenever this workflow is reaching this step and not failing on any of the other one, it will actually execute ESLint. And ESLint by default throws an error when something is wrong. When all of these steps are actually successful, well, the workflow has passed. So this will result in a sort of bender kind of bugging you all the time about, hey, this is wrong or this is not right. Why is this useful? I mean, if we go back to our dependency or a wheel of hell, we can see that we require a review per implementation. And reviewing things is hard, requires attention from a lot of people. But now that we can automate it, then without bugging anybody, the creator of that implementation can get a ping if something is not right, or the reviewer can just hold off on reviewing until those things are fixed. Whenever Bender decides to reject it, well, it's pretty clear that's not right. And it's also pretty clear when it's when it's successful. But that's not everything, because this is just CI and does not involve Expo whatsoever. So in the next step, there is another thing we can help or we can add to improve the whole workflow. So going from review to build, you probably, or Gary probably needs to do a lot of steps. Usually Gary just checks the comment like, hey, what's going on in this PR? It should have a summary. It should have some basic reasoning why this is required. Everybody knows that single developer who creates a PR with thousands or 100 lines of codes. So it's best if you just see a low amount of this, because else nobody will review it. So next up, Gary would check the actual change. And in this case, it's the same change that we already had in the previous example. It's the form button being changed with an icon. So again, he only sees that these files are changed. So in order to make sure that the app is actually working, because Gary thinks that there are more screens that actually require a form button, but he isn't sure. So the next step, what he would do is he would check out, update his local repo, check out that branch, making sure all dependencies are up to date, maybe something was added, and actually running this, running Expo start. So these kind of things eventually will lead up to a QR code that he or she can scan. In this case, Gary can check to make sure that all buttons are working. Now, there is something kind of annoying about that, because those are a lot of steps and you have more work that you want to do on projects or anything else. So there is the other side of CI is CD, and that's where we deploy something somewhere. As Atlassian says, it's responsible for the automatically launching and distributing the software. It's a short quote from a long text, but I really like it. So how do we do that instead of having to do it every PR locally on your machine? So as you can see here, this is almost the identical code from what we already have with ESLint. Instead, there are a couple of additions here. So within these, there is a new action that is setup Expo. And this uses our pre-built, ready-to-use Expo GitHub Action plugin. It installs the latest Expo CLI version 4.5, and it authenticates you with a token. This is stored within GitHub secretly, and nobody would access it. But if you run any of the Expo commands after this step, they are fully authenticated and you don't have to do anything with it. So our next step will be actually deploying a preview that the reviewer can read or use. And in this case, you can see that we use a release channel with a PR in here. That's because you never want the PR to leak into the production build. So always use a certain release channel that is unique per pull request to publish these kind of, well, previews. And then last but not least, yes, you do get a QR code in the output of Expo Publish, but it's hidden away in the logs of GitHub Actions. It will be way better to just have a comment inside the PR where you have the QR code, you have the basic information, and everything you need to actually try it out. So that's this step, and it will result in comments like these. So instead of going through the code first, the reviewer can just scan this QR code and actually see the whole project on his phone. They can use Expo Go for this. They can use dev clients. You can use pretty much anything with this. But you see the actual result instead of trying to read the code and making sure everything is updated everywhere. Just try it out. So these commands that we normally would have to do locally, they can go. I mean, it's already done. They can just scan it. So that's already like a major improvement in, well, the wheel of hell. So in this step, we basically ask Bender or the automator to create a previews that we would normally have to make locally. Now, there are a few other things in GitHub Actions that might prove really useful, and those are the triggers. So until now, we just used on pull request, which basically means on everything related to pull request in your repository, that will trigger the whole workflow. There are others, like workflow dispatch. We use it a lot when manually deploying something somewhere. And usually Gary uses it to minimize the riskiness of really large actions, like replacing a whole server or something like that. And last but not least, there is a push branch, on push branch, and then whatever branch you want. So in this case, the workflow will be triggered on whenever somebody pushes something to the main branch. Now, why is this useful? Because you can also combine it. And combined with this, we can actually go for the last step that will help CD, or like help you really empower CD. So again, this looks similar to the previous one, but actually has a few new things. So we changed the trigger here to run this workflow on every change to the main branch. We install Expo, but we also install the EAS CLI that we're going to need to actually make or schedule a new build. And when all dependencies are installed, we actually run ES build for all platforms and let them auto-submit it to the store. And this basically creates a new wheel of hell, or basically helps you safeguard all steps, all 3 steps that we listed here, and let you revert back to a wheel of fun instead of a wheel of hell. This is all I have for today. I hope this was useful. Thanks for having me. And if you're cool and if you want to work with an amazing team thinking about this and more, sorry, Theodo, ping me on Twitter.
Amazing. We got a little competition on the hiring front there. Hey. No, thank you so much, Cedric, for that. That was a really interesting talk, and like great to see how Expo can help out with automation and GitHub Actions. Seems like Expo is just out there ready to just dominate and managing every part of I don't know, the development lifecycle of a new app or a new thing. I just wanted to ask, just to start off, how did you get into React Native development, and what was the first and most interesting sort of part for you?
So my first thing actually with React Native was Expo. At my previous job, we were trying out a few things with React Native because we usually did native, but well, it kind of backfired, and we had the exact same issues as Gary had, but with less knowledge about native code. So we tried React Native with Expo, and that's how I first got in touch with both Expo and React Native.
Okay, nice. So have you done much or any native development at all in your time at Expo?
Of course, like maintaining the native Expo SDK, which includes a lot of Android code, a lot of iOS code, and now also Kotlin and Swift. I do need to do some native stuff. Yeah.
Nice. Did you find that I don't know, the learning curve was quite high, or?
It's different. Yeah, I'm glad that there's just code to maintain instead of to build. So I can just debug and fix small things.
Yeah. I mean, I've found when I'm developing in React Native or Expo, I'm mainly just on the JS side, so I shy away from anything native. So Fran, I have massive respect for that as well.
Yeah, I understand.
I've got a question actually from Callum. So he basically asked, so this doesn't replace GitHub Actions, it sort of works alongside that? Is that right?
Yes, yeah, it's fully right. So it doesn't replace it. We don't have a deployment bot like Vercel has. Instead, you can just like add Expo in the most simple way to your GitHub action and do anything with it. Like you can create that the comment with the QR code, but not comment it on the PR. You can also send it to Slack if you like it. You can do whatever you like with it. It goes really deep, whatever you can do with it.
Yeah. I was really impressed by that part, actually. The fact that you can sort of add the CLI to your GitHub Actions and then use it in any way that you want. I thought it was more like, initially you'd have have the ability to add those plugins and do certain things, but only things defined by you guys at Expo. But no, the possibilities are endless, it seems. So that's awesome.
So we do have like EAS build and a whole build service, right? But you can also run EAS build locally in GitHub Actions if you like. There's like close to no vendor lock-in. You can pretty much implement it however you like.
Yeah, nice.
Related to that, I had a question as well about the fun wheel, the fun cycle.
Yeah.
Kind of with that that Expo preview that you did, is it trying to kind of get the almost the build process before the review? So once you review it, it's kind of good to deploy in a way. So trying to kind of like switch those two steps up.
So they are like overlapping a lot with each other, right? So the preview functionality, I would say, is a bit of CI and CD, and it overlaps in both like testing if the implementation works, but also in trying exactly what you said, trying to publish an OTA somewhere. I think Gary would use it in such a way that's more CD than CI. But I know people are actually like pre-building the whole thing as an OTA in a PR to promote it to production later on. So you can implement it both ways. In this case, it was more CD than CI.
Awesome.
Good question, though.
And do you also are you able to use in kind of a monorepo fashion as well with GitHub Actions? I've not used GitHub Actions before, but like so you don't build it if you have like a backend change or something.
Really, really good question. Like I really like this one because with Expo SDK 43, we changed a lot of things related to Expo and the whole core. So we added support for monorepos, what like plain React Native not really has. You have to do a lot of native code changes to actually get that working. So if your project actually works with a monorepo, if you can basically run any command wherever you like in your whole repository with GitHub Actions. So if it's a monorepo, then execute those commands in the right directory.
Makes sense.
But it's, yeah,
Nice.
it goes really deep.
Fair.
Awesome, awesome. I had just one last question, I guess, before we move on to Fran's presentation. What it was kind of specifically about something in the presentation, and it's mainly because of my lack of knowledge with Expo, but what does the release channel flag actually do? Because you said it's super important to keep it there.
Yes. Yes. So we're actually working on something called EAS update, which kind of changes a few things around that. But with the old like release channel system that we have for Expo Publish, you basically create a JS bundle that you publish on a channel. By default, it's just the default channel. But when you create a binary, your actual app, it will listen to one of these channels. So when you build it, you can pick which channel it should listen to. And then when it's actually deployed to the stores, for example, and you can push out an update, but you see a really important bug that you need to fix, you can use OTA to like over-the-air update by pushing or by publishing it to the right release channel that will be listened to on those bundles. So they can be used very wisely, but they can also be used very wrongly. For example, if you have like all kinds of production running apps listening to PR5, and well, somebody might push to PR5 or anything else, then all your apps are updated with code you probably don't want to have out yet because it's still in development.
I see, I see. So you could expose, I don't know, features that aren't ready yet on an actual production app, basically.
Yes, yeah, you can do a lot of bad things with it.
Wow, okay, I'll keep that in mind for future. Nice one. Well, I don't think we've got any more questions, Fran. If there's anything else that you wanted to mention, otherwise we can move on to Fran's talk on building a Android module for React Native.
Yeah, ready? Cool. So hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation on the React Native Bridge. So quick overview of the things I'm going to be covering. Initially, I'm going to be talking a bit about what the bridge is and how the bridge works. And then I'll be going on about why you'd even need to know about this kind of stuff, and a little bit of a tutorial on how to write your own native modules and pass them through the React Native Bridge. And linking onto that, I'll be going over how I wrote my native module and why I needed to do that. And I'll also be covering alongside that some different ways of correcting any native code that might be wrong in your project or that you might just want to correct for whatever reason. And I will touch on at the end a little bit about what's in store for the future / happening now. So a little bit about myself. I'm Fran. I work as a full stack developer at Theodo, and I've mainly been focusing on React Native. And it's been really fun, aside from some of these bugs that I found that leads to presentations like this. Cool. So usually when I've given this talk in the past, it's been live or there wasn't such a big delay. So I could ask questions like this, but I'd like kind of you guys to take a moment, try to answer this for yourselves. It's a little bit of a Q&A on what is the React Native Bridge and what you think it is. There's a correct answer. So the bridge provides a way for JavaScript code to communicate with the native layer by either one, passing through serialized JSON data, or two, interfacing JavaScript with the native layer. So usually people go for the more intuitive answer here, which is wrong. So it is in fact answer one, but there will be a little bit more on answer two towards the end of the presentation. So going a bit deeper into how the bridge works, we know from the fact that the answer was one, that the React Native Bridge works by transforming the serialized JS code into JSON and sending this data into the native views. The native side then receives these calls serialized by the bridge and calls functions under the hood to process the serialized JSON. And then the native layer updates as per the request it receives. So here in the diagram to your right, you can see kind of both sides of it. One is an event that was triggered and sends it through to JavaScript, and the other is a JavaScript event that updates some UI, and you can kind of get a full circle of this as well. So now that we know how it works, or the basics of how it works, why would you actually need to know any of this, essentially? So reason number one that I found is that React Native libraries can sometimes have bugs in them. And sometimes it's helpful if you have an understanding of the underlying native technology, and it might help you to solve that bug. And reason number two, which is rare, but the functionality you may want may not be implemented by any React Native library. And if that's the case, or you want a little bit of extra functionality, say you're making a calendar app, or you want to do some cool stuff with the camera natively, you need to write that yourself, essentially. So those are the two reasons. And now that we know why you might want to, let's look at how you'd actually do it. So for the next couple of slides, I'll take you guys through how to build a small bit of functionality that just starts an activity for an Android app that opens your React Native app. The disclaimer, when I first started writing this native code, I started off by using VS Code with kind of no plugins in anything at all. And that was quite painful of a development process. So a bit of a tip I give to any beginners if you're writing an Android code is to use Android Studio as your IDE. It has quite a nice debugging and logging functionality. And it just means that the feedback loop is a lot clearer and a lot quicker. So cool, after that disclaimer, diving right in, a little bit of config you'll need to do is in your React app. If you follow these directories from your app, you need to create two new files, one for the module and one for the package you'll be writing. The module is where you have most of your main methods, and the package is mostly for configuration reasons. In your module file, here's a basic skeleton of essentially what it looks like. I'd recommend writing a class that extends the React context-based Java module. This will give you access to some really good helper functions, helper methods that allow you to do all sorts of cool things within React. For the purposes of our example of starting an activity, build this out so that we include in this a method. Let's call this method start activity. This start activity method, as you can see, just gets the app context from React. It creates an intent and it adds a flag to that intent to create it as a new task. After that, there's a context of start activity. Because your app is running, you can use context, and that focuses the intent. This seems a little bit basic for now, but it does tie in with a problem I had later on. So once you've written kind of all of your methods that you'd want to call from React in this module class, there's still one thing left to do to it, which is to add this particular method. This getName method is required, and it's what essentially React will know to look for when you're calling these methods within your class. And I'll show an example of this in a second as well. So cool, so that will be your whole module class. And then your package class can mostly be copy pasted. This is a kind of a skeleton of what it will look like. The only thing that will really need to be changed is the bit highlighted in red, where you just add your module to the package you created. And the final little bit of configuration as well is to add the package you created to your main application. And then React will have access to it, and you'll be able to call it from your React front end like such. So native modules will come from React Native, and you'll be able to pick out the module that you wrote and that you named from the getName class from the native modules. And then you can call all of the methods that you created within that class from here as well. And one thing that's good to note as well is if you do any promises in Java, you'll be able to asynchronously use your await and .then logic in regular JS as well. So with all the basic stuff out the way, that's kind of how you write your first Android native module, how you call it from React. Let's dive into the pain I had dealing with it. So not too long ago on a project I was on, we faced a little bit of an issue where the library we're using had some code in it that was deprecated for the Android versions we were using. Essentially, what this library did was it provided a native call screen or a native call notification, as you can see on the screen there, so that when we got sent a notification to our phone, our React app would pick it up in the background, and they would use this library to launch or trigger a native UI notification. And what we wanted to do is when the user clicked answer, we wanted to redirect them to our React native application instead of using the internal phone's native UI. For this particular bit of logic where we want to open our React native app instead of the phone's native UI, the library didn't handle this so well. This is something they call the self-managed approach. And they essentially said that they didn't really do self-managed. They had some code which did open the app, which we could trigger, but it was deprecated for the Android versions we needed. So after a couple of days of debugging, I figured out that the problem was internal to the library itself. And so what I did was create the start activity class, much like you saw, and tried to call it to actually start a React Native activity from that call button. Oh, I forgot to mention that the two states it didn't work from particularly. It worked from the front end and it worked from if the app was in the background mode, but it didn't work from a lock screen state, as you can see there, and it didn't work from a quit state when the app was not running in the background. So what I needed to do was start an activity, coincidentally, links in right in of our example. So I started off with this class and kind of tried to recreate some of the logic that I would need. So in the start activity class, what I first did was I got a key guard manager from React context using our wonderful class that we extended. After this, I was able to create a variable to check if the phone was locked. Then I was able to start creating the intent I would use to launch the React Native activity. If the phone was locked, I added a couple of flags. A lot of the issues around why this library didn't work had to do with some of the flags they were using were deprecated for our Android versions, but weren't deprecated for the Android versions that they were targeting. So I added these flags here if the phone was locked, and then I did some extra checks for the other use case, which is if the phone is in quit state or the activity is not running, I needed to start the React Native app in a different way, essentially. So here's all the end logic I had for that. So then finally, all that I needed to do was simply call start activity from within where the user answers a call in this answer call function. I did a check to see if the users were indeed on Android. And if they were, we could start this activity. And in the end, we got this beautiful functionality working. While the lock screen is a little bit iffy, we ended up doing a lot of improvements to this in the native layer to kind of get things a bit smoother. But yeah, after a couple of days of painful debugging, we're able to solve it and get everything working, which is lovely. And that's kind of how you'd go about writing any native functionality you'd want to include as extra from a library, or if you want to write any native functionality for yourself, that's kind of how you could go about it. However, another method you could go about it, which is one I also ended up using, is patch package. Patch package is a library that essentially allows you to go into your node modules and edit any of the code you see there. It will create a .patch file for you, and it will log all of your changes, kind of like a git log. And then these changes will be inserted into your files, into your project after yarn is run. I'd recommend these for kind of like hot fixes and small bugs, temporary solutions, but not something you'd probably want to keep for very long. It's definitely better to open up a PR for the library that you think has a bug in it, or add some extra functionality to it if it's that small a change where you're just using patch package. And yeah, in this case, this was an Objective-C iOS only bug where kind of it was crashing for some reason. So kind of while debugging, we figured out that adding a try catch to this particular part of the code meant our app didn't crash anymore. Very hot fix kind of solution, but it works as an example, I guess. Cool. So now that we kind of know the two ways of injecting native code into your app and writing your own native code, I want to go over some of the problems that people usually have with React Native. And the main one is the lag. So most of the people complain about with React Native and the way it works and how the bridge works is that it's very laggy. Because the JavaScript code sends serialized JSON data, if you're kind of scrolling too fast on your app and it needs to update UI too quickly, or you have a lot of animations and the device you're running on isn't too powerful, you're going to experience a lot of lag. So what can we do to overcome this essentially? Well, the future, or slash not future because it's already been released, is the JSI. So not so long ago, React Native announced it's going to introduce something called the JavaScript interface, or the JSI. The summary of this announcement is that instead of using the bridge to communicate with native UI, you'd be able to write C++ code, which interfaces directly with JavaScript and is also able to call the native layer directly. Some libraries like Reanimated 2 have already started to use this innovation, but at the moment, JSI is still relatively new and there's still some very good open discussion threads around it. And there's really good information out there about the power of it and the things you can do with it. But kind of the main selling point is that you no longer need to use the bridge and that you just write a ton of C++ code, interfaces directly with JavaScript, calls the native layer directly. And this leads to essentially huge performance improvements and very powerful UI. And yeah, that just about wraps up everything you need to know about the bridge. So thank you all very much for listening and look forward to your questions.
Nice one. Thank you so much, Fran, for that. That's super interesting talk on native modules. That was sick. Yeah, I guess I'm going to start off with a similar question actually that I asked Cedric. So when did you first get into React Native development? Was it only at Theodo, or have you done some personal projects? And what's your most interesting part that you would say?
Yeah, so quite interestingly, I started developing some of my own applications before Theodo, but I used something called NativeScript, which is based off of Angular. Didn't like it that much, but I prefer React. But yeah, I only started learning about React at Theodo. However, I had some knowledge of the native side of things beforehand.
Nice. Yeah, I actually similar kind of story. Actually, I started with NativeScript and even wrote a little plugin for it because I didn't like the animations, so I tried to make them easier. But
what did you think of NativeScript?
Sorry,
what did you think of NativeScript?
Well, I had a bit more of a background of Angular. So at first I liked it, and then I learned React, and I'm not going back.
Fair.
So yeah. Oh no, that's interesting though. That's cool. Yeah, I guess another one actually that I thought of while you were talking there, like what resources did you find that were most helpful when you were trying to make this native module? So was it documentation or talking to your colleagues or what? What was it?
So it ends up being a variety of things. React Native itself has some very good docs on how to go about doing all of the setup for the bridge to React code. But after that, you're kind of by yourself in a sense where you need to look at either Android docs or know someone who knows how to do Android development. I think with a lot of the intents, there's a few people I go to internally at Toyota who teach me a thing or two about intents, but a lot of it is also just looking at the Android Java documentation, kind of seeing what's deprecated, seeing what else you could use, and just going about it that way.
Nice. So just looking about at docs and seeing what's out there.
Pretty much.
Nice. The life of a software engineer, right? We've got a question actually from Angus Finlay. I think he's another Theodore. So he asked, did you say JSI involves writing C++? How similar is it to the modules you described here?
So I haven't actually had a chance to look that much into the JSI. It does involve writing a lot of C++. I saw the presentation when they initially launched it, and I think to make a button, it's something crazy, like 100 or a couple hundred lines of C++ code to make it work. So keen to see the results of it, but not super keen to try it out, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully it's documented pretty well, actually.
Yeah.
Cool. We've got another question actually from Barbara. She said, super interesting talk. But do you have any recommendations on VS Code extensions or other tools for working on the native bridge?
Cool. Well, thank you, Barbara, for the compliment. I didn't search for any VS Code ones simply because when I hopped onto using Android Studios, kind of the debugging experience was so nice that I didn't need to. You could use the logcat, I think it's called, and it logs all of the stuff Android is doing behind the scenes, and it's very useful for debugging. And it also lets you know it reads your minimum Android version, and it knows from what you're doing if you're using something complicated or not, which is super useful.
Nice. If for me, if it's anything more than console log, then that's all right. No, I'm joking. So I think we've had
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
So there's a lot of hype around like Java versus Kotlin and Swift and C++ or whatever. So what is your favorite? Like, which one do you like the most working with React Native modules?
As in out of Java or like Objective-C and Swift?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It controversial. I'd never picture myself saying this, but I prefer Java.
Oh, nice.
Objective-C is a little bit horrible to look at, and I haven't tried Swift.
Did you try Kotlin?
No, I haven't tried Kotlin either. I'm assuming it's very similar to Java.
Yeah, exactly. That might be worth though.
Yeah.
Nice one. Yeah, we've actually got another question from Wiser Every Day. So they asked, does every React Native developer need to know JSI, or can one learn or implement it as needed?
I definitely don't think every React Native developer needs to know it. I think it's very much like a debugging process. You don't need to know every language. You just kind of need to know how to debug and figure out what's going wrong. I would not have considered myself a native developer at all, but I was able to kind of find out this bug, go through the debugging steps, and kind of write some nice fixes. And then it's all about just improving on the fix that you did. I don't think it requires too much expertise, just the want to learn and fix the bug.
Yeah, exactly. I think, these tools are out there to help us abstract away some of this complexity. And when you start thinking that you need to do it all, it can just get massively overwhelming. I guess that's why Expo is so good actually as well, because it takes away so much of that, that complexity that you need to set up in the background and just does it for you. So yeah, amazing. Yeah, I guess one just last question for you, Fran, and then Cedric, if you've got any more. But I just wanted to ask: have you come across any other limitations in your time with React Native as opposed to native dev? I don't know if you've done any native dev, but is there anything that you think is notable?
So usually, from what I've noticed, things like using the camera, there's quite a lot of good libraries for. But recently being involved in like a lot of the calling functionality from this project I was working on, there aren't that many good calling libraries for React Native around like getting the notifications and getting like cool just call UI going on. So that's one of the areas I think potentially could be improved on the React Native side.
Nice. Cool. Super interesting. Well, Cedric, have you got any other questions for Fran? All good. All right. Well, yeah, I guess we can wrap it up there then. And thank you so much, Fran. Thank you so much, Frederick, for your awesome talks. It was super interesting to listen to you both. And thank you to everyone who watched the stream live as well. You're an amazing community. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.